friends, I'm Amy, and this is A-Star Reads. And I'm gonna be doing my mid-month wrap-up for you. This month I had a lot of books on my TBR. And if you haven't checked out my TBRs, go ahead and check out my Indigathon and my Believathon TBRs. There were a lot of books, and there still are a lot of books. In fact, these are the books I have yet to read. So, yeah, a bit much. Because of how many books there are this month, and because I haven't really done any vlogging up until this point, I figured I should kind of do a mid-month wrap-up so that at the end of the month I don't have way too many books to talk to you about. I'm gonna go through the different readathons, talk about those books, and then I'm gonna talk about the other books that are not part of readathons that I have read. The most reading I've done so far is for Believathon this month. And if you don't know what Believathon is, I'll leave all the information down below. It's a middle grade readathon. You are going through this little map, trying to pick up all these different little clues to locate the suspect, somebody who has stolen the missing Maleficarum. And the Maleficarum, I think, is a spell book that has gone missing. Somebody stole it. We're trying to figure out who it was. So in order to find out, you need to collect all 13 clues. And you know, you could double up on clues for books, but no. I had to have a book for each clue, of course. Starting with Believathon, I'm gonna put the little map up here, and I'm gonna indicate to you where I've gone on this map. In order to have gotten into the building, you need to have gotten the key, which is to read a mystery, a middle grade mystery. And I did. I read The Case of Windy Lake by Michael Hutchinson, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. You know, I really enjoyed it, and there were elements to it I really enjoyed. And the story was really heavily based on the history of this community. Living on the reservation, a lot of the struggles that they have had to face, including how the government has treated them. That was actually a really big portion of this story, which was pretty in-depth information for middle grade, but I actually loved that. I loved that history was being displayed in such an open and honest way, and in a way that I felt like children could really understand. My concern was that the mystery was not very satisfying. I feel like if you had just kind of presented this book as more of a middle grade fiction and kind of went that route, I would have rated it a lot higher. It was really slow moving for me, and I kind of felt like that part didn't add to the story whatsoever, which is strange because it is actually a mystery book. Like, it was meant to be a mystery book. The parts that I felt like really boosted the story were actually the family relationships and the friendships. They were endearing and heartwarming. All in all, I felt like there were really good things about this book, which is why I give it a 3.5. If I'm looking at it as a mystery, that part of it was actually really disappointing for me. The Case of the Windy Lake, I got my key. After entering the building, I walked into the hallway and I noticed some fingerprints on a little table in the hallway. I had to collect this clue, and to do that, I needed to read a book from a culture different than my own. So I chose When We Were Alone by David Alexander Robertson, and I gave this book 4 stars. It was beautiful. I thought the illustrations were gorgeous and colorful. I thought it was very heartwarming. It was about this young girl asking her grandmother all these different details about her culture based off how she looked, some of the things she said, her hair. And so this young girl was learning about the history of her grandmother. I thought it was a really amazing way that Robertson went about talking about a really difficult part of history and how it affected her grandmother in a way that was appropriate for a really young audience. Ultimately, the ending was a little abrupt, and that was kind of what brought my score down a bit, because there's sort of a pattern to the way he's writing this story, and it kind of goes and goes and goes, and then all of a sudden you turn the next page and the book is done. And I was kind of not ready for that. I needed a little bit more at the very end. So ultimately, I thought this was a really great book. I would definitely recommend it for young children as a picture book. I wish there was just a little bit more to the ending. All of a sudden I heard this scream coming from outside, so I ran outside and I got this wild inspiration to read a book to my mom or listen to an audiobook. So for this prompt I picked We Sang You Home by Richard Van Camp. And this book is for really little kids. I mean, this is a book for you could read to your infant/toddler. I gave it 4.5 stars. It was so heartwarming. It made me cry. This is the perfect book to give as a gift to new parents, because it really is about that love you feel when bringing a brand new baby home. And so all of it was perfect, except some of the actual illustrations were a little bland to me for a toddler infant book, and some of the illustrations were kind of small. So like the little pictures of the little parents occasionally were like really teeny with this beautiful background scene, but like little teeny. And I just would have liked slightly larger illustrations with a little more richness in the color. And that's just personal. After collecting the Scream, I went back into the house and I tiptoed into the library because I love books. I'm drawn to books, and all of a sudden I saw this torn page on the ground. On the torn page it said, "Read a book with a supernatural element." So I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll have to do this. So I actually picked How I Became a Ghost by Tim Tingle, and I gave this book 4 stars. There were definitely elements to the writing style that weren't amazing, were kind of simplistic, a little repetitive, but there was so much more about this book that I really, really appreciated. Tim Tingle is Chippewa, and his ancestors went through the Trail of Tears, and so he explains the Trail of Tears through this story. Look, Isaac's creeping, you little creeper. Through these really endearing characters, these characters that you really enjoy. They're brave, they're strong, they're fearless. The main character finds out pretty early on he's going to die. So he's preparing himself for the end of his life during this story, which I thought was a very mature way to look at death. So not the way we tend to look at death where we're afraid of it. He kind of embraced it. One of the friends that the main character made was actually a shapeshifter, and so that part I used for the supernatural element to it. There was a lot of love between the families and between the Chippewa people in this. And it was nice to see a really ugly part of history that we tend to shy away from explaining to children, being explained in a way that I felt children could really absorb. So as I was investigating the library, I saw this little closet, and so I went and opened it, and there was this gorgeous crown there. And to collect this beautiful crown, I needed to read a book that was set in an alternate world than my own. So I chose Those Who Run in the Sky by Aviaq Johnston. And this I gave 4.25 stars. I really love this book. I love the setting. So this is a story based in Inuit culture. And it's about this young boy named P2 who's finding out that he's going to become a shaman. And it becomes a surprise to him because it's not always a good thing. People love shaman for what they do, but they're also kind of scared of shaman. He's also being groomed to become the leader of their little clan. So he's got a lot riding on him. He's not a young kid, but he's just barely coming into adulthood. He's a great hunter. And he's out hunting one day and he gets lost and he ends up in the spirit world, which is frightening. There's a whole bunch of really scary parts of this book. And while he's there, he has to get guidance in becoming a shaman himself. He cannot leave the spirit world until he's perfected his powers as a shaman. I thought that the characters in this story were so charming, especially P2. Amazing character. I loved this kid. He was incredible. I felt like the beginning was fantastic and the end was really amazing as well. Parts in the middle came across as a little slower, which I was a little bummed about, which is why I'm only giving this 4.25 stars as opposed to 5 stars. The folklore included in this was incredible. I really loved the character development. There were so many good things about this, and the fact that there were only a few parts that to me kind of were a little too slow moving really didn't bring it down that much. I thought it was really well done. After grabbing the crown, I was like, oh, I hear some music playing in the distance. So I actually went into the ballroom, and on the floor I saw some footprints. And when I saw those footprints, I was like, this is the next clue. I better read a book featuring a prominent villain. So the book I chose was Skeleton Man by Joseph Bruchac. And this book I gave 4.25 stars. For a middle grade horror, this was actually really scary. This one was actually creepy for me, and I could see this being very scary to children because the main villain is very realistic, and the setting is very realistic. You could easily see yourself in a similar situation, and that's what makes it so scary. Really liked Joseph Bruchac's writing style for this book. I enjoyed the main character. I thought she was strong and brave, and you could tell that this book flowed well. After finding these footprints, I decided, I'm gonna go check out the study. I go in there and I see spilled ink all over the desk, and I think, oh gosh, this is the next clue. This must be the next clue. Because I don't know who spilled this ink, I imagine it must be ghosts, and so I figure I better read a book that features ghosts. Maybe that'll give me the next clue. The book I read for this is actually The Return of Skeleton Man, written by Joseph Bruchac as well. And this one I gave 2.5 stars for. Like I just told you, I loved the first book, right? I really loved the first book. I was expecting the second book to be comparable, and for me it wasn't. I felt that there were quite a few issues with the flow of the second book, and some of the actual content did not apply to the main storyline, and it sort of felt like he was trying to do 3 different books in one. I liked some of the ideas he had for other storylines, but I feel like then just write another book. So the ghost that is represented in this book is the Lady of the Dead, part of the Dia de los Muertos tradition. This goddess comes to Molly, the main character, and sort of acts as guidance and a protector for Molly. And this was a part of the side story that I felt was a really interesting side story about the Mayan culture and about Dia de los Muertos. It just didn't really go with the whole Skeleton Man storyline. 2.5 is not bad for me. It's just that with the first book being so great, the second one was just really different. I'm in the office, I hear something heavy hit the wall near to me and kind of fall and clatter. And so I run into the kitchen. There's this really pretty dagger lying on the floor. It kind of freaks me out that there are knives being thrown around, and I realize I'm in this really dangerous location. And so I pick up a book that has a dangerous setting because I figure maybe that'll help me get this clue. For that, I chose Crossing Chito by Tim Tingle. This is another book by Tim Tingle. So this was actually a picture book, and I gave it 4.5 stars. It was beautiful. The illustrations are beautiful. The story was heavy, but really well done. I mean, this is for children, but man, it was heavy because it was about this young girl named Martha Tom, and she wanders across the Chito, which is a river, and she meets this family of enslaved people. And so mostly it's this story about how she helps this family escape and cross the Chito. Again, Tim Tingle is taking these really hard parts of history. It's really difficult subjects, and he's making them appropriate for children. And I really enjoyed this. I really felt like it was a very important read, and I don't think you need to be a child to read this one. And the artwork on this one, just so incredible. It was beautiful. So I am wandering around the house trying to figure out more clues, and I go upstairs and I see this backpack, and I'm like, oh, perfect. I have all these clues I need to carry around with me. Why not pick up this backpack? So in order to get this backpack, I need to read a book by an author that's new to me. So I actually picked up Christine Day's book, I Can Make This Promise. And this is a middle grade contemporary. And it's about this young girl named Edith, Edie for short. She knows she's Native American, but she doesn't know anything about her past because her mom was adopted. And she has two best friends. She's dealing with issues with one of them. When her friends come over, they actually go up into the attic to look for something, and they find this box full of pictures and postcards and letters that are all written by this woman named Edith, which she realizes is her namesake. She knows nothing about Edith. Who is this woman? And a picture of Edith looks just like her, similar facial features, and all of a sudden she realizes this is something that I need to know more about. But as 12-year-olds do, she doesn't ask her parents right away because she doesn't think she's gonna get a satisfactory answer. She gets very angry at her parents because she feels like they're hiding stuff from her. She goes on this journey of trying to discover more about Edith, more about her culture and her heritage. And this book was a 5-star book for me. It was so good. It was so, so good for so many reasons. It was all set in the Pacific Northwest, and it was all surrounding tribes within the area. I feel like she did a great job of talking about some of the issues that different tribes in this area faced, and I felt like they were fairly relevant. The other thing I really enjoyed about it is she was expressing someone like me who comes from a heritage that they know very little about, and I felt that same sense of yearning and desire as this young girl did, because I have felt the same thing myself in trying to understand more about my family, the heritage, what it is to be Nooksack, and what it means to have this background. Now, aside from that, I just thought that the story moved along well. She did a good job representing how 12-year-olds think, because it was very dramatic in parts. But 12-year-olds can be very dramatic in parts. And there was a certain level of that's not fairness that I feel is appropriate for this age group. I was impressed that it felt like I was reading something about an actual 12-year-old. You find out very early on that art is very important to her. And I liked the way that Christine Day represented Edith's point of view, how she would view things being an artist. She's an artist, so she sees things in a certain way. And Day did a really good job of representing how you would see the world around you if art was the most important thing to you. I don't know. I just thought she did a great job. I want to see more from her. I'd like to see what she can come up with, because there was something about this that was so well done and yet so simple. Like it seemed effortless. So that's it. I am still on the hunt for more clues, and I'm hoping to get more clues this weekend. Since I have 9 clues and I need 13 clues total, I still have 4 more clues, which means 4 more books. So hopefully I can get to those. I'd like to find out who stole the Maleficarum. I'd like to do that before the end of the month, but man, this month is flying by fast. Next, I want to talk about the Indigathon and what I've been able to accomplish for that. So for my free space, I started reading Custer Died for Your Sins, which is a nonfiction book written by Vine Deloria Jr. And I'm about 70% finished with that one. It's Very dense. There's a lot of information in this. And so I'm kind of taking it a little bit at a time, and that will definitely get done before the end of the month, but I'm not finished with that yet. For number 6, I did buddy read, and I'm buddy reading with Liz from For Booking Out Loud. We're reading Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones. It's been fun to talk about the different elements of the book with her, and I feel like we have a lot of things to discuss because this is a pretty complex storyline. There's a lot going on in Mongrels. I'm not gonna give you a rating yet because we have a conversation about this book on Sunday, and I really have not yet decided how I want to rate it anyways. I'm kind of excited to talk about it a little more. I had to finish the last section up a little faster than I wanted to because the book had to go back to the library. So it's kind of been hard for me to rate this one. I'll figure it out. Prompt number 8 was the group book, which is Heartbeat Braves by Pamela Sanderson. Hey, it's Editing Amy, and I'm here to save the day, I hope. I was struggling for some reason talking about Heartbeat Braves, but I'm going to do a better job here, I hope. I gave Heartbeat Braves 3.75 stars, and this is an own voices romance written about Indigenous characters within an urban setting. And Rayanne, the main character, is a project manager at the Crooked Rock Urban Center, which is this center that has the intention of bringing other Indigenous people within the community, within the city together. Because a lot of these people are native, but they're not close to the reservations that they may be from. And this is an opportunity for them to have a community within the city. Rayanne is working on trying to improve the center because they're hoping to move to a new location. The board of directors changes, and one of the new board of directors puts his nephew into Rayanne's position. So he makes Henry the project manager. And this, of course, as you can imagine, pisses off Rayanne because she's worked so hard and all of a sudden Henry's coming here out of nowhere. It really is sort of an office romance with all of the administrative dialogue that goes with that. So if that's not your cup of tea, it might feel like it's a little more of a slow-moving story. It's really about forming these relationships. There's a lot of elements to talk about the culture and heritage of these individual characters, which I really enjoyed. I'm glad that we had some representation in a romance novel because I feel like there's so many romance novels that have Indigenous characters that are written by non-Indigenous authors. So it was nice to have a romance that had the perspective of Native characters that was actually written by a Native American author. So the characters took a little bit of time to get into, in my opinion. Rayanne was not as well developed in the beginning as I felt she started to become towards the end. And that was true for most of the characters. Once you started seeing the dynamic of this group of characters all together, I started liking them a lot more. I will pick up the next book, and all in all, I enjoyed this. Was it the most thrilling romance? Probably not. Was the storyline the most exciting? Maybe not. But was it steamy? Yes, it was steamy, and I liked the characters. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the books that I finished in November so far that were not part of either readathon. The first one is a romance novel called Black Witch Magic by Meland X. And this was independently published. I actually got it from Nat Gelly. I think it released October 30th. This was a romance that was sort of an urban paranormal fantasy, but mostly romance. I mean, the intention of this was a romance novel. And I actually gave it 3 stars. I felt that the fantasy element of it was really interesting, and I actually liked that storyline way better than I liked the romance. The romance was okay. There was a certain level of snarkiness to this story that I didn't care for. The cheese factor was, sometimes that works, and for this one it was just a little too cheesy. Also, the reason the romance didn't work as well for me is that I didn't really like the main male character, Aiden. He was a nerd, and I like nerds, don't get me wrong, but he was kind of a jerk, and there were elements to his personality and his character that I just didn't care for. I liked the main character, Celine. She was charming, she was cute. Aiden was a little annoying, is what he was. He was a little obnoxious. Celine is a witch. She's a honest-to-goodness witch. She comes from a line of witches, and her family is cursed. They're cursed because something happened to her grandmother, Luna Blackstone. And she's living her life as a witch, and she's not allowed to leave the town she lives in because the curse actually keeps her there. But she's hated by a lot of the people in the town. They don't know that she's an actual witch, but she gets blamed for a lot of the bad things that happen within this town. She has a best friend named Noelle, and I like their dynamic. Noelle's also a witch. Aiden and his best friend Eddie are paranormal investigators, and they actually have this really popular show, except Aiden is a skeptic. He's a total skeptic, doesn't believe in magic, doesn't believe in ghosts, doesn't believe in any of that stuff. And then he meets Celine. They have a nice little meet cute. They kind of feel the chemistry from the very beginning. At one point, Aiden realizes that Celine's a witch, and that's frightening for him, but he's kind of trying to help her deal with this situation that has happened that is implicating her in a crime that she didn't commit. And it kind of goes from there. And the actual scenes where there is paranormal happenings and action scenes and the adventure of the story, I really liked. I liked some of the creativity that Mila Nix put into this. I just wasn't as into the romance. Like, I think that if you had turned this book into a paranormal fantasy, I probably would have liked it better. Another book that I read was 7 Generations by David Alexander Robertson, and this is a graphic novel about the First Nation Cree in Canada. This surrounds some of the horrible things that went on during the period in Canada where they sent a lot of the Indigenous children to these residential schools. There are topics in here of sexual abuse, suicide, substance abuse, and heavy extreme depression. And it was a really hard story. It definitely made me cry. It was also a very important read. I know that David Alexander Robertson wrote this specifically for older middle school / high school students, so they would actually have some of the history of Cree Nation that was accurate. The jumps in time were a little inconsistent, or at least they were a little confusing. There were definitely parts where I had to go back and forth and try to figure out where exactly I was in the timeline, because I got a little confused by some of his jumps. All in all, I think I gave this 4 stars. It was really good. It was very important. It made me cry, but there were technical issues that I feel brought it down a little bit for me. But for graphic novel, considering I'm having difficulty with graphic novels, I really enjoyed this one. The next one I want to talk about is the graphic novel Sheets by Brenna Thumler. This one is incredibly popular. I've heard quite a bit about it on BookTube, so I wanted to check it out. And for me, I have to give it a 3.5 stars. It was good. The main character was a girl that I felt a lot of sympathy for, but I just didn't have a connection with her, and I didn't have a connection with the ghost, really. This was really cute, very endearing, a really interesting concept, very, very creative, but I had a hard time connecting with the characters. I also really had an issue with the father character in this. I was so frustrated with him. I know that grief can be overwhelming, but he was neglecting his children a year after his wife died, and I just had a hard time not being upset about that. You know, being able to separate my feelings about that with the story. It's sometimes things hit you in a certain way and it's a problem. So that was one of the things that maybe brought it down for me, just because I couldn't get past my anger towards this father. and that's really on me, because that was not a focus of this story. It really wasn't a focus of the story, and yet I had a hard time getting over that. The last book I finished completely was The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. He's also the author of Mongrels, so I read 2 of his books this past month. I gave The Only Good Indians 4 stars. It was really hard to rate this book, and if I read it again, I might rate it differently. I don't know if I'd give it more. I don't think I'd give it less. I did actually really like this. It's the kind of book, though, and both of his books are this way, it's the kind of book where you kind of need to read it a couple of times to really get, if you're interested, if you like it, you kind of need to read it a couple of times to really get all the different parts he packs in there. And there's a lot of things that you can discover from his writing that you can easily miss. There are a lot of references or jokes, a lot of jokes. There's a lot of jokes in there that you will miss if you don't kind of really focus on what he's saying. And so I found it was hard to read his books quickly. I needed the time. I needed to go back over the things he said. I needed to really think about it. And this book was a horror story, and it was horrifying. It was very scary. It wasn't like other horror stories. It felt real. One thing I found about his writing style is that it feels like you're watching it, like you're watching a movie almost. You know, you're reading this, but because the details and the way he expresses things seems so real, it doesn't actually feel like you're reading it. It feels like you're watching it. And I liked that, and yet the graphic scenes in this are so graphic that it will shock you and it will make you incredibly uncomfortable. This is a very uncomfortable book. Even the supernatural elements he adds, his monsters, seems so realistic. And so I actually got nightmares from this, because my subconscious was like, whoa, this is woo, I don't feel comfortable about this. The reason it's not a 5-star for me is probably because of all the basketball jargon. It's very detailed, and apparently I'm not that interested in basketball because those are the parts that slowed me down quite a bit, which is kind of a bummer because those parts are really important to the story. Still, 4 stars, and I will read it again at some point. So that's it. I'm still listening to The Year of the Witching by Anne Rice. I've got about 27.5 hours left on that. 50 hours of listening to an audiobook for me is a little crazy because I don't listen to audiobooks that consistently. But I'm enjoying it, really. There's elements to it that are very taboo, that are difficult to read, but all in all, I like the story that is being told. So that's it for my mid-month wrap-up. I think I'm doing pretty darn good this month so far. Let me know if you've read any of these books in the comment section down below and what you thought about them. Because, you know, maybe you feel very differently, and that's okay. If you like this video, click the like button now and subscribe. Subscribe so you can find out what else I read for the rest of the month. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you later. Bye.